Hello, CNU. I bring you greetings from the South Bronx, or the Boogie Down, which is, hip hop for the South Bronx. Anywho, I love this. This is one of my favorite parts of the CNU charter, and if you'll permit me, just read it. I'm sure you've all memorized it, but I'll just say it for myself. We recognize that physical solutions by themselves will not solve social and economic problems, but neither can economic vitality, community stability, and environmental health be sustained without a coherent and supportive physical framework. That just seems so obvious, right? So obvious. But it's funny, Lynn, as you were speaking and you made that comment, like nobody gets up in the morning and goes, I don't want to make a beautiful space. I'm going to make some ugly ones. Also, it would seem like that's obvious, but when this was me, I was about 10, I'd made the honor roll speech at my school, and that's my mom greeting me lovingly when I just come off the stage, paranoid and just like, oh my God, flipping out. And I was full of wonder and hope for the future, right? But this is the kind of stuff that was outside my door. So, and it started long before I was 10 years old, making a speech for Honor Society. But this is the kind of thing so when I hear things like, nobody says they want to wake up and make ugly things in communities, when you grow up in a low status community where you're told in certain and uncertain ways that your community doesn't really matter, and that it's shown to be that way as a result of various policies, whether it's racism, whether it's classism, or just lack of understanding of understanding that everybody on this planet deserves a great place to live, and that our humanity is always challenged in negative ways when our physical environment essentially tells us that we're worthless. We act out in those ways, and unfortunately it's this sort of perpetuating dynamic when we don't create those kind of opportunities for people to see themselves as part of an environment that is in fact beautiful and wonderful. And so growing up, this was the South Bronx up until frankly like the mid-1980s. It was the poster child for urban blight. There was a lot of disinvestment, financial disinvestment in particular, going on around the country, but we were that poster kid. So we lost a tremendous amount of the walk-to-work industries that my father actually was happy to move to the community for back in the 1940s, because it was a thriving walk-to-work neighborhood. People literally walked to work and to the waterfront and to play and to transportation. It was Congress of New Urbanism would have totally approved. And, but that changed when financial disinvestment happened, redlining happened. People like my father, if our house hadn't been fully paid for, we couldn't sell it because there wasn't anything, no one would buy it. And the fires happened, which meant that landlords were torching those buildings because there was no kind of financial investment coming in, whether it was loans or any kind of things like that to support them. So that building that I showed was just one of the effects of that. But another effect was things like this. The manufacturing moved out, those buildings were vacant. This was the kind of quote-unquote economic development that took its place, which of course had a really negative impact on the quality of life of people who lived in those communities, whether it was public health impacts or whether it was how we viewed the community around us. It was not a great place to be in a bunch of different ways. So at the time when I spent, from the time you saw that picture, actually even earlier than that, when I was 7 years old, I was planning my escape, because I was looking for greener pastures. I was looking for a city because I wasn't into the country thing. But I knew that I was going to use education to get out of it, and that was my plan. So I was going to go to a name school for college, and I wouldn't look back. But I ended up having to come back when I got into graduate school at NYU and needed a cheap place to stay, which was my parents' house, period. That's it. Otherwise, I would not be here. But moving back home got me face to face with some of the environmental issues we were dealing with, and And that's when I started understanding, well, the kind of situations that happened to us because we happened to be a poor community of color that was politically vulnerable. And that's why our land was used in that way. Excuse me. So I actually got to work not just on the, when our city was planning on building another waste facility on our waterfront, I actually got more involved in how do we create the kind of community that we wanted to be in versus the kind of community that the power structures, whether it was our city and state government and developers, actually saw our community being viewed as. We were like, we have some assets here. We've got a waterfront. Why can't we create the kind of community that we want? We knew people in our neighborhoods were leaving our neighborhood to take their kids just to play in a park. Because the kind of parks we had in the neighborhood, either they were concrete or they were walled by fences that you just wouldn't let your kid into by him or herself. And so when we discovered that there was this little grant program through the U.S. Forest Service, that's when I kind of realized there was an opportunity there. So I got that a seed grant, and we were able to take that as an opportunity to redevelop down by the Bronx River. Because it was that grant program was specifically designed to get people who lived in areas where there are threatened urban rivers to do something about them. And so we use it as a way to do cleanups, provide lunch for folks when they did, just little opportunities to get people down to the waterfront. This was the beta version of what we did. And again, what we realized then was even though people wanted, the experience of being in a park, we didn't have it in our own community. So we had to create programming to make sure that it happened down there as it did. And so upon doing that kind of project, we were really excited because we realized that there was more opportunities than not. We were able, because we got people down there, people understood that we were there, we got the attention of city, state, national, international folks who were just like, what is going on in this little ghetto in the Bronx? And we were able to take that as a way to get $3 million worth of investment to come to redevelop that park. And this is one of my favorite pictures in the world because as you can tell, I'm just posing because I'd worked 7 years for that, and I was like, I am ready for my close-up, baby. So I did, and but this is what the Hunts Point Riverside Park looks like right now, and having that, as a visual reminder to people that this is exactly what we want to see in our own communities, which is a super exciting place, that suddenly we had something that actually reflected beauty back to them instead of the kind of environment that told us that there was something wrong with our neighborhood. Yeah, thank you. And I did get married there back in 2006, yeah. And that's the dog that literally dragged me into the park the first time, because if I didn't have something like that with me, I don't think I would have gone into that place. But now, and then just really quickly, I wanted to go through this too as well. But again, the environment is around you, and when you think about a sense of place, it's not just that it doesn't just exist in isolation, right? You're connected to other things. It's like you understanding that you are a part of a bigger picture, that there's value in all the way along. But what's interesting about this in particular, the East Coast Greenway, I'm sure many of you are familiar, runs all the way from Maine to Miami. When it got to the South Bronx, it literally made a beeline around it. And so it's just sort of like, okay, what are we going to do about that? So I wrote the original proposal to get the Greenway to go through the South Bronx on bike and on water. And so we got $1.25 million, which was possibly the most money that we ever got in our community for a positive use. And we designed this Greenway, which was we got about $50 million for first phase projects to come in to do that kind of work, which was incredible. Again, it did like both infrastructure as well as the actual, the physical, beautification projects as well, providing green infrastructure, stormwater management, all sorts of, the air quality benefits, and of course, it was physically appealing. It made people want to look and be in a place that actually was just a beautiful spot to be. And last but definitely not least, it literally connected our South Bronx to another really amazing part of New York City green infrastructure, which is Randall's Island Park. We were separated from that area by 25 feet of water. That's it. But this particular aspect, this Greenway development, made it so that we were actually connected. So now, when we look, and it was really cool. And so now, when you go and look at the East Coast Greenway map, you do in fact see that the South Bronx is a part of it. Yay! But all that to say that when I really stopped to think about like what kind of community we had and what we wanted, these were the kind of things that we still saw. Yes, we had some great infrastructure, green infrastructure, which I'm so proud that I had anything to do with, but there were still other things in the community that made people go like, is this really where I want to stay? So these are the kind of food choices that we have. And you're in Seattle with like Foodie Central and coffee awesomeness, and it's just, we don't have that. So you don't understand, like you probably can't understand what it's like to live in places like this. But to have, and have the kind of economic developments that make you want to shop in another neighborhood. Okay, seriously. Not that many choices in terms of the kind of goods and services that you can find. Plenty of places to self-medicate, frankly, if you want to get it. And then there's, if you want to build your own financial profile, is it easy to do that? No, not really. These were the kinds of these taxes on being poor. It's like you have to pay out in order to get anything. Payday loan places, pawn shops, and definitely, last but not least, huge amounts of highly subsidized affordable housing. And I say quote unquote affordable housing because it's affordability means affordable for a range of people, or it means different things to different people, right? But in low status communities like the South Bronx, it's only for the lowest, the lowest AMIs you can possibly find. What we get when we connect all those things together, like lack of choice in terms of economic developments, bad food choices, lack of opportunities to create, your own financial wealth. What you get, you only find those things in very low status communities, which then provides opportunities to do nothing except concentrate poverty, because nobody else is going to those communities. No one. And that is by design. But what happens when you design a community to concentrate poverty, you end up concentrating all the other things that we know poverty supports. Whether it's, higher rates, worse health outcomes, higher rates of economic instability, unemployment, obviously, poverty straight up, and then, whether it's possibilities for, higher rates of incarceration, just all of those things that we see, that we know it happens when you concentrate poverty. So when we recognize that, but then what's also super, super interesting is that in those same neighborhoods, it's not, the people in those neighborhoods, we're taught to measure success by how far we get away from them. But isn't it interesting that those from the outside are looking at that place in ways that make them go, that's interesting. There's some possibility there. Maybe the housing stock, maybe it's sort of crummy now, but they could be really interesting soon. Or, it is near some pretty good transportation infrastructure. Or, there's a possibility here. And they're looking at it from an outside investment standpoint as the next new thing, or as many folks will definitely just call it gentrification. These are literally examples of the kind of letters and notes that I get under my door from my house a couple times a week. Just, that's what I get. Now they've even found my cell phone number, and they're calling me, it's like wanting to buy my house for cash. Because again, when in our communities where we measure success by how far we get away from our community, if we don't see value in it, it's not that there isn't value in it, it's just that the value is there for someone else to exploit. Because we're often not given the opportunity to learn from it and build our own communities as a way to benefit ourselves. So, but there are plenty of people in communities like ours, and in particular, we actually started this project called the Hunts Point Advisory Board, specifically because we kept hearing from people about how they wanted to create, have a community that they felt that they didn't have to leave in order to move to a better one. And so we were asking them, and we sort of used them as a focus group about the kind of work that we wanted to do, because we realized that it wasn't just going to be staying in the environmental world, or the sustainability world, which is where I'm originally from, but it was also about using real estate development as a tool in order to create the kind of community that we wanted to stay and build in. And so these folks really gave us an opportunity to sort of use them as a sounding board to get feedback and input about what they wanted to do and how our our projects could actually play out. And even more importantly, they found their own voice and realized that they themselves could be the kind of a voice for their own community, because they all came with incredible networks. You know, one of them ran a daycare center for more than 30 years, so she literally raised 3 generations of people, you know, within our community. And then there were others who actually actually situated himself and bought a candy store on one corner, on which he knew was a pretty hot corner, because he spent some time in jail, didn't want anybody else to do so, and bought this little candy store, because he knew that as people passed by, he would have an opportunity to stop them and like just talk to them about their lives, and so that they wouldn't make the same kind of mistakes that he did. So those people are on our informal advisory board. But again, they did these wonderful things on their own. Like, for example, they got very involved in the idea of the streets, that the transportation infrastructure was just bad. There were a lot of pedestrian accidents at this particular intersection, and they made it really clear, you know, to the Department of Transportation that it needed to be fixed. And when they finally made those changes, the head of DOT would not even hold the press conference unless those people in the red shirt showed up. Like, that's power. And that's like understanding that they were in it together. But one of the things that these are the type of things that we learned from them so clearly about what a great community could be, and how we could create the kind of neighborhoods that we wanted and what we were missing. And it was some of these things. The fact that there were places to gather, you know, year round, and it wasn't just like just outside walking to the subway or anything like that, but that high quality, like, built environment. We've got great, you know, buildings in our community, but it's not like the kind of thing that inspires people to stay because we're not so much in them. We needed job creation in our community, and definitely we recognize that, you know, if we're measuring success, our children were measuring success by how far we got away from our neighborhood, there was brain drain going on. So people like to think, oh, brain drain only happens, you know, in the developing world. No, it happens in America's low-status communities every single day. And it's not just inner-city ghettos. It's like, you know, America's former white coal mining towns and industrial places. It's on the reservation. It's wherever there is very little opportunity for people to live the kind of lives that they want. And what we had to recognize, especially, you know, in the Black community, that some of the unintended consequences of the civil rights legislation literally made it so that, you know, we could, quote unquote, afford to go if we could afford it, you can go everywhere you wanted. But our racially segregated communities that happened during when segregation was legal were economically diverse. But when we were able to move where we could, because we could afford to do so, what did that mean for the people that were left behind? And our communities are still dealing with that to this day. Communities of all colors, like, how do we get out of that? And you know, folks that we worked with were just like, this is some of it. Like, reduce the brain drain, retain the talent in our own communities so that they're the ones that turn around and reinvest in our own neighborhoods, versus having someone from outside do it. But of course, they had to see the value in it and not just be like, oh, we just need another community center, because I just love when developers come to communities like ours and they're like, oh, we're gonna give you a community center. I don't know anybody from a community like ours who has left our neighborhood, who was doing well, so that they could go to another community with more community centers, okay? It just doesn't work that way. But this is what you do if you're a crappy developer and don't care. And that's why I'm counting on the folks who are working with CNU to recognize, don't recognize it as a pattern and don't do it. So, but anywho. But one of the things that many of the things that we do, we now focus on economic development through real estate. That is what I do. And so we had to take, you know, again, our own investment, because there wasn't any kind of investment coming, quite frankly, to a Black female developer working in our own community. In a community that I'd literally brought tens of millions of dollars of investment to through various projects. Banks wouldn't loan to me. You know, this was money I had to save up to do the kind of projects that every single last one that I'm about to show you. And it's because there is that kind of structural issue around, can we even afford to do this kind of work? And I'm really lucky in that regard, because I was able to find partners who could help, you know, within reason. But one of the first things we did, because not having spaces for people to hang out in, we don't really have them. So we invested in create our money into a little coffee shop. And we got a great partner to work with us, Birch Coffee, which is a really wonderful, very specialty, high-end coffee shop with a roaster in another part of New York City, and they're amazing. And so they worked with us, taught us everything we could possibly know about coffee and customer service, and we were then able to do that, but ultimately we were able to acquire the full interest, within Birch Coffee, for our own cafe, and it's now the Boogie Down Grind Cafe, which is kind of cool, which is the only 100% locally owned specialty coffee shop in all of the South Bronx. And I'm pretty sure it's the only high specialty coffee shop owned by 2 women of color in the Bronx as well. So having something like that, it is a really big deal within our community. Another beautiful thing we did, I don't know if I'm sure, I'm at CNU, so I'm sure you all know Cass Gilbert, great American architect. I'm very delighted to say that I actually am the proud owner of a Cass Gilbert building. This is one of them. It's an old rail station that was back in 1910 it was built for the Harlem-New Haven line, and Amtrak closed it off, railroad service was closed off back in late 1940s, and it's been sort of essentially only this sort of like strip mall. When the owner died back in 2011, I approached Amtrak and said I'd like to acquire it, and it literally took me 4 years, but I got it. And but in the meantime, they evicted everybody. I hired some young kids from the neighborhood to fix it up a little bit, just as a mural to make it nicer for people to walk by, because it's not fun to walk by a completely abandoned, ugly building, even if you do know it's a Cass Gilbert underneath it. So doing a little mural on it made it nice. But like the whole idea is like, what do you do in it? And this was one of the things we did, which was literally think about what does our community need? What is it lacking? And going back to what the advisory board was thinking about, they wanted things like more restaurants, places to congregate, things that were beautiful within their neighborhood to make them feel that way. And so we looked at like, well, what do we need to do to get more restaurants in the community? And also, but just the realities of it as well. I mean, if I was having as hard a time as I was getting any capital to do the kind of work that I wanted to do real estate-wise, I knew that it was going to be very similar for other folks doing it, and especially since we wanted to support the talent that was already in the Bronx. So we knew minority business owners were going to have a harder time getting that kind of capital to do that. Location, super critical, and of course, if you are if you throw down in the kitchen, right, it doesn't necessarily mean you know how to operate, the business of doing that thing. Then we know it just detracts from what you're doing if you're not well capitalized to do it as well. And these are the kind of food options that we have. And believe me, a good cucifrito, good Latin food can be awesome, but if it's really all you have in a neighborhood, it kind of gets old, and it's not particularly healthy either. But what we noticed was that in our low-status communities like the ones we were located in, there was this perception that people didn't want good food, even though we knew, based on our own market research, people left the neighborhood to experience it. And so that was really interesting. And what we also knew was that not having decent places made it easier for folks who were in positions who could afford to leave to do so, to go to places that had the kind of things that they wanted. Again, that brain drain thing. Needing to retain the talent in our community so it could reinvest in us, because otherwise we knew losing those income generators created this reinvestment gap, which made it so much easier for gentrification to happen. So essentially what we are trying to do is self-gentrification, because last time I checked, people in low-status communities like nice things too, and we're saying is we want to do development that's by us and for us, and that's essentially all that it means. So the idea of a restaurant incubator was born, which is creating like this. Essentially, it's like a really cool food court with local chefs. That's all. And creating this, but it would create this sort of like, versatile, very high quality third space for our communities, and it gives an opportunity to launch new businesses as well. We're basing the model on this restaurant called Bergen out in Brooklyn, which has the same thing, these 4 little individual stalls that makes life really beautiful for folks as well. And the restaurant itself the house would own the point of sale system, and and have the opportunity to do so that they're not paying rent. rent. They're simply paying a portion of their revenues, back to the house. And then we own the bar as well. So that's how you make money, to make it happen. But ultimately, it's a really cool kind of, exactly, it is the bar is always the money. But to have a beautiful space, that you can kind of see Cass Gilbert like winking at you through like what this building used to look like. But how cool would it be when we actually restore it to its former glory, as much as we possibly can? Again, economic development is what job creation. Those type of things were so important, to folks within the community. In addition to the advisory board, we did hundreds of surveys as well. This digital divide thing, people like to talk about if people had broadband access, everything would be fine. And actually most people do, whether it's through smartphones, but it's not just the smartphones. It's not just broadband access. Really, the digital divide is this. Are you simply a consumer of technology, or are you just a producer as well? Are you creating? Are you working in the field? And what we know now is that this generation, and particularly people of color, very tech savvy. It's just like kids are being born, coming out knowing how to work a touch screen. It's the creepiest thing ever, but it's true, if you've ever seen it. But what we know about our country is that it is not diverse in the tech space in a lot of different ways, but unfortunately when it comes to money, it's not very diverse. But in particular in the tech world, in the New York region, it's really crazy because we were no longer minority white back in 2011 in that region, but the tech numbers are still the same even there. So we're going to be the country by 2040, no longer majority white. But if these tech numbers continue to grow, or stay sort of stagnant as it is, that's going to be kind of crazy because, we know that innovation, that diversity just loves innovation. It actually helps support it and breeds it. So we're going to need like all hands on deck to use the kind of tech, the technical expertise to create the kind of future that we're going to need. So we really don't want to be leaving any people off to the sides, because I think the world's challenges are going to be that big. Tech is going to be a part of it, and we're going to have to do something about it. So one of the things that we did was create a way to sort of address the fact that we needed to help low status communities participate in the tech economy. So Startup Box was that tool. The first one, of course, is in the South Bronx, and it's really designed to just make sure that they can participate. So one of the first things that we did was we had to get people in the door. We did try initially to do things like, oh, we're going to teach kids to code. Lots of people were doing that. And then we were like, oh, we're going to open up an incubator, realize that people still needed, they needed more financial literacy before they can even get to the point of starting their own businesses. And then we realized, let's try something else. This was our talent base, whether we initially thought we were going to get a lot more people whether they hadn't been, spent some time in jail, didn't have any kind of degree or even a high school diploma, but we also got folks, that we realized we had to address that actually had CS degrees, but were victims of statistical hiring bias as well. So what we did was we looked for a market-based way to deal with the fact that we needed to get people in the pipeline, so it wouldn't be like this sort of fresh air fund approach thing where, we get, the kid of color, in some tech world, and nobody knows how to handle each other, and it's all uncomfortable for everybody. So what we did was we've looked for a market-based solution so that we can sort of integrate slowly, people into the world of technology, and learn on the job. And so we realized that there was this thing called software testing or quality assurance that is a part of the software development pipeline that allows people to go, there's an opportunity here to create new ways to test software. And right now, much of that work is offshored, but for certain parts of the software developer community within urban areas domestically, having it offshored, time zones away, in different languages doesn't really help them with their product, especially in the entertainment world, with their games or websites with lots of moving parts. And we realized, we can't compete on costs, because no matter what, Asia, Eastern Europe will always be cheaper. no matter what. But we can give them value because we have the market intel. We are their market, and we could do this. And also, quality assurance was awesome because it gave people a super opportunity to kind of understand that they had a great way to kind of build into that world. They learned from the back in order to experience it, through product failure, which was great. And so we realized we can create that kind of opportunity then. So I ended up funding a program where we trained people to do quality assurance, and then we offered the service. So it was a B2B business that we're doing. We're not placing anybody with them. We offered the service to these companies for free to see if it would work. And whether it was Nickelodeon, huge company, or Trescenza, one you've probably never heard of, but was doing their thing. And we essentially, in my conference room, sat people down and they started doing this work. And again, what we noticed and what we realized was that the community itself, or rather the folks who we were doing this work for, were really happy with the product. And they were so happy, we realized that, oh, we can scale this thing. And so that's when we realized that we were able to provide this kind of service to our clients with value add and create an entry-level job with career ladders for our people. And that was the best part of it. What we realized was that then the market itself was growing in a super, super big way. And that's when we realized we could actually take it from there and do all sorts of fun things, like actually get a space that was outside of my conference room, which was great because doing that allowed us to open this spot up in ways, and also we wanted it next to the coffee shop because techies love coffee and everybody else does too. But we wanted this particular space specifically on a storefront, on the commercial area in the community, because we wanted people to walk by to see Black and Latino people working in technology. Most people had no idea what quality assurance was. But yeah, thank you. But they could look through those windows and see people that looked like them and know that they were actually part of a tech economy and not that it was leaving them behind. We used a really interesting recruitment strategy, which is we literally used gaming tournaments as a way to recruit people because we knew that many folks in our own neighborhood were feeling like demoralized. And so if we went to them and said, hey, we've got a tech job for you, most of them would be like, no, you don't. Because it's just that's generally, when you're used to being disappointed, you're used to being disappointed. So we hosted, but we knew that if we could see people, playing in games in this space, it was a good personality screen. Were they jerks, to other people, or were they nice? Were they, willingly giving technical expertise or not? So that was a really kind of fun thing for them to do. We also used this as a great way to kind of build bridges within the community. We actually hosted a Call of Duty a gaming tournament between cops and community as a way to bring people together after the Eric Garner verdict. And I got to tell you, at first, we were not sure if anybody would show up. And they did during a blizzard, and they stayed till 1 o'clock in the morning. And what was exciting to me to this day, it makes me so proud, was that we were in such, our city was in pain, but our community, our precinct, was the only one that did not have an increase in negative community and police interactions. So that makes me really, really proud of that. Yeah. And so we were able to create this, and we're so excited about the fact that now we can take this and move it forward in a ways that we were hoping to scale this around the country. And last but definitely not least, this is a project. This is a former juvenile detention facility. My dad was actually a janitor in this space, but in that space, I realized that there was a great way for our community, 5 acres big, when it finally closed down, that this could be a way for us to really consider using a site that big as a catalyst for the kind of communities that we wanted to be in. Using mixed income housing, mixed use commercial development, really using public spaces as a way to democratize our community as well, create different opportunities to keep dollars circulating throughout our community through commercial and retail, recognizing that this might be one spot within the country, but this is a great opportunity, I think, for many post-industrial areas within the country, where there's the residential commercial and and a former manufacturing place and where they abut together. And so what we realized here was that that little weird area where nothing really happens, where there's not a whole lot of things going on, we could use that as a place to create new opportunities to activate the ground plane, to make things going. I actually put this idea on the city's radar back in 2011 after that site closed, and as a way to really raise the bar for what could happen in terms of how we build out our communities, whether it was through, in particular through mixed income housing and mixed use commercial development. We did design competitions, international design competitions just to keep it on the city's radar, to show what could possibly happen, just to inspire people in the local community as well as around about what could potentially happen there. I assembled one of the most incredible teams to do, when the request for expressions of interest finally came out, and really looked at that as a possibility for how to build more than 1,200 units of mixed income housing, 200,000 square feet of space for commercial, manufacturing, some cultural as well as retail space that was going to produce at a minimum 800 new jobs. And our city, unfortunately, and it was really important to note that that particular proposal was possibly one of the most diverse and highly accomplished teams in all of New York City real estate development history. More women and people of color led and owned teams than ever before on a project of this scale, competing together. And unfortunately, our city, in all of its infinite wisdom, decided that instead of actually looking at a project that was going to create jobs, health, walkability, all sorts of incredible things, and also an incredibly beautiful design, the city went with 2 all-white male development teams. One of them wasn't even from New York, and all they wanted to do was build a low-income housing project with no jobs. So this is why this is one of my favorite quotes in the world, because this is the kind of world that we've been living in for as long as all of my memory. The kind that assumes that our neighborhoods, that low-status communities in particular, are just designed to be that way, and they will stay that way. It doesn't have to be that way. Everything is a design challenge. That's all it is. It's a design challenge. It doesn't mean that it's not set in stone, and even some stones are meant to be broken. People like me, who are literally walking that walk and working as hard as we can with resources that are almost always so hard to get, and when we do get them, it's like pulling blood out of a stone, because I happen to have been born, a certain gender, a certain race, a certain class. Those are the realities of this. That we need we need to know that we can do all this together, that there is an opportunity to make opportunities happen equitably. I understand that leadership is disrupting your own people at a rate that they can absorb. I'm not saying that any of this is going to be totally comfortable. I think we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, at least temporarily, so that we can actually fulfill the kind of promises of the charter that you all wrote and believe in the same way that I do. Thank you for your time.